culture is a simplification and a lie. It's the currency by which fools navigate the world. Smart people get beyond it, and you can choose when to do that. I don't think for myself it happened until my middle 40s. And then suddenly, because experience and maturation somehow found each other and carried me forward, I began to think like this. Before, I was, in a sense, a true believer. For all the psychedelic experiences and political activism and so forth and so on, I hadn't yet understood that culture was a vehicle that could only be ridden so far, and then beyond that lies the great and to be defined unknown of one's own individuality. And many people never get beyond the imposed neoteny of cultural conventionalism. As I said, it's insidious that in middle life, circumstances tend to deliver us money. Either our parents die or our professional activities finally pay off. And that money is usually the final nail in the coffin of ever evolving beyond cultural convention. Why should we? At last we've achieved the fruits of our labors, the good life, the comfortable dream. But it's the dream of anesthesia. You know, that feeling you feel is the gurney that's rolling you toward the tissue disposal ovens. Anyway, yeah, Mike. Yeah, it does. I mean, you're right that cool, then, if you aren't cool, you go to incredible lengths to achieve it by ersatz means, by buying $3,500 sunglasses and getting tattooed, and, you know, but it can't really be faked. But the whole engine of marketing is designed to make you think that it can be faked. I don't know if I'm cool or not, but I am incredibly resistant to any effort to make me think I'm uncool. In other words, because the answer always lies in commodification. You know, I'm not using the right body cologne. I'm not wearing the right Italian designer clothes. I don't slump with a half sneer on my face. All of these things which are marketed as the accoutrements of cool. So you get a clueless culture aping cool, and of course real cool can't be commodified. That's what makes it so cool and so maddeningly distant from the uncool. As long as we're on this kind of tack, this morning I talked about the imagination and its friends, and you recall the list, and I won't refresh it, but I thought it would also be useful to talk about the enemies of the imagination. We've talked about culture as the enemy of imagination, and I think we've done enough of that. The other thing that I think is the enemy of the imagination, and this may seem paradoxical, and it may raise hackles, and it may bring controversy, but it has to be said. There's always been a strain of this in my thinking, in what I'm about to say, but my son pointed out to me that I needed to hammer this particular key harder. My son is sort of my surrogate in the culture. He goes out to the highways and byways and listens to the murmurings of the people and then tells me what's going on. And this brings us to the subject of relativism. I'd never quite heard it put this way until he put it to me this way. What is relativism? Relativism is the idea that your ideas are as good as anybody else's ideas, and all ideas are equal in worth because nobody can tell what's going on anyway. It's the live and let live, laid-back approach to doing intellectual heavy lifting. I'm a nihilist, you're a Nazi, you're a Christian, you're something else. Hey, no big deal. Let's just hoist a beer and party on. Well, I have to defer. It's a problem, especially in California, where this thing has gone from being a pathology to the defining mode of normalcy. But it allows stuff like Heaven's Gate. It allows Jonestown. Nobody ever said to those people, "You're full of shit. Don't think like this. This will lead to catastrophe." Instead, people said, "Hey, cool. See you in the sky." And people say, "Well, but now this sounds like you're advocating acrimonious and emotionally painful judgment-making that will leave some of us disenfranchised from our belief in the space people or the presence of great Atlantis or something else that's very cherished." Yes. Yes. We have loosened our girdings sufficiently, folks. We are now open-minded enough. You don't want to become so open-minded that the wind can whistle between your ears. And there are logical razors and rules of evidence that can be brought to bear on any situation. So, for instance, our culture is awash in claims of all sorts. Religious claims, the 1,000 various religious offerings on the market, and then it moves over into medical claims, dietary claims, claims of superior sources of knowledge. I can read the Dead Sea Scrolls, you can't. She's talking to the space people, you can't. This guy is accessing past lives, you can't. There are all these whisperings and intimations of special connection and uniqueness. If you are passive in the face of this, I think your intellectual arteries will just fill up with mental cholesterol, and eventually you'll have the equivalent of a coronary thrombosis at the intellectual level. It's very important to hone intuition and logical razors so that reasonable questions can be asked. And it may break the mirrored surface of we're all in it together, the illusion of community maintained by nobody ever criticizing anybody else. But this nobody ever criticizing anybody else brings the intellectual enterprise and the refinement of human knowledge to a screeching halt. The way in which the intellectual enterprise moves forward is by being critiqued, analyzed, subjected to tests. And, you've all heard me knock science, and I have many bad things to say about science. It has to answer for some of its sins. But the great thing about science, and the thing which makes it unique in the history of human intellectual endeavors, is it is a human intellectual enterprise in which you get lots of credit for proving that you're wrong. Scientists really respect each other for proving that they are wrong. If you have a theory that you've defended for 15 years and then you publish a paper saying, I've been over it again, I've looked at the data again, and you know what, fellow colleagues, I botched it. I was wrong. They promote you for this. They say, this is the essence of intellectual honesty. We know you do good work because we see how you trashed your early accomplishments. Religion doesn't work like this. In the religious domain, you never admit you're wrong. You further elaborate the story to save whatever preposterous notion has been exposed, and you never deny, you never recant, you never go back. And so what you get is error, based on delusion, based on illusion, based on lie, based on half-truth, based on supposition, based on somebody thought it would be nice if. And it's no wonder that there's not a great deal of spiritual juice in that. So I think there are many things to be said about science, that it has relied on probability to too great an extent, and so forth and so on. These are technical issues, but in our personal lives, it's a wonderful thing to take as a model. Always seek the simplest explanation. This is called the principle of parsimony, otherwise known as Occam's razor. Sounds very fancy. All it means is always prefer the simplest explanation. Try the simplest explanation first. If it fails, complicate it as little as you have to go to the next level. But we live in a culture where the simplest explanation is never accepted. Somebody sees a light in the sky. Immediately, it's a UFO invasion. The possibility that it was a meteorite, a piece of aircraft in trouble, something like this, is not entertained. And so consequently, people's intellectual lives become incredibly baroque, but unanchored in the world of observation and reasonable discourse. And God knows the world is so tricky that without rules and razors, you are as lambs led to the slaughter. And I'm speaking of the world as we have always found it. Add on to that the world based on techniques of mass psychology, advertising, political propaganda, image manipulation. There are many forces that seek to victimize us. And the only way through this is rational analysis of what is being presented. It amazes me that this is considered a radical position. I mean, this is what used to be called a good liberal education. And then somewhere after the 60s, when the government decided that universal public education only created mobs milling in the streets calling for human rights, education ceased to serve the goal of producing an informed citizenry, and instead we took an authoritarian model. The purpose of education is to produce unquestioning consumers with an alcoholic obsession for work. And so it is. But as people who may have had one foot in this system at one point and another foot in it at another, I think it behooves us to be alarmed and to attempt to recapture our souls, essentially, from the nets of a propaganda, market management, commodity obsession, money fetishism, these various extremely infective memes that are spread everywhere.